Welcome to the Flag Bearer channel. This is Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Throughout the tapestry of American politics, one thread has continually woven a story of resilience, activism, and unwavering commitment to justice. That is the role of Black Americans in the political process. From the Reconstruction era to the present day, whether Democrat or Republican, Black leaders and voters have shaped the nation's political direction and in turn the nation's future. The original Republican Party was one which was anti-slavery and filled with conscious members of the then-defunct Whig Party. The anti-slavery platform is what got most of the northern states to vote them in. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the Republican Party was responsible for passing 3 constitutional amendments that established Reconstruction in the South. The 13th Amendment said slavery was no longer legal. The 14th Amendment said all former slaves were now citizens with equal rights. The 15th Amendment gave the freed slaves the right to vote. The ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments codified freedmen's participation in the electoral process at the time when upward of 90% of Black Americans lived in the southern states, constituting actual or near majorities in more than a few. This led to more than 300 Black state and federal legislators in the South holding office in 1872, a level not seen again for more than 100 years. These elected officials were overwhelmingly Republicans, swept into the office by the unity of Black voters who assembled to demand equality and liberty that hinged on keeping white segregationists from power. The early Republican Party consisted of Northern Protestants, factory workers, professionals, businessmen, prosperous farmers, and after the Civil War, former Black slaves. The party had very little support from white Southerners at the time, who predominantly backed the Democratic Party. The Republican Party opposed the expansion of slavery before 1861 and led the fight to destroy the Confederate States of America. While the Republican Party had almost no presence in the southern United States at its inception, it was very successful in the northern United States. With the election of its first president, Abraham Lincoln, the party's success in guiding the Union to victory in the Civil War, and the party's role in the abolition of slavery, the Republican Party largely dominated the national political scene until 1932. Before 1932, Republican presidential candidates always won the Black vote, and all Black members of Congress were Republicans. Almost all Blacks voted for Republicans, who favored Reconstruction and stopping slavery forever. Almost all Southern whites then moved their votes to the Democratic Party. President Ulysses S. Grant, who was elected in 1868, and the Union Army protected the rights of Blacks. Reconstruction was working. Black Republicans began to be elected to public office. Between 1865 and 1900, there were 21 Black members of the House of Representatives and 2 Black senators, one of them a former slave. All were Republicans from the South. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, the Republican Party was seen as the friend of the Negro. The Democratic Party was seen as the party that supported segregation and white supremacy. Blacks in both North and South voted Republican. Democrats were far more racist than Republicans were. Republicans were way more likely to vote in former slaves shortly after the Civil War. As a result, any freed slaves who chose to run in politics would choose to do so on the Republican platform. In the early years of Reconstruction, newly enfranchised Southern Blacks in states including Mississippi enthusiastically threw overwhelming support to the Republican Party, which spearheaded the cause of ensuring their civil rights. They unified with a minority of racially tolerant Southern whites to form Black and Tan clubs. White communities that voted red were known as lily whites because of the color of their skin. Black politicians who ran for office or voted Republican during the 19th century were called Black and Tan Republicans. The term Lily White movement was coined by Black Texas Republican leader Norris Wright Cooney. He used the term in an 1888 state Republican convention to describe efforts by white conservatives to oust black people from positions of Texas Republican Party leadership and incite riots to divide the party. The Black and Tan faction was a faction in the Republican Party in the South from the 1870s to the 1960s. It replaced the Negro Republican Party faction's name after the 1890s. Southern Republicans were divided into two factions, the Lily White faction, which was practically all white, and the biracial Black and Tan faction. They often took a prominent part in the national conventions of the Republican Party. One reason for the continuance of the Black and Tan faction was its effect in holding the African American Republican vote in the northern states. The Black and Tans predominated in counties with a large black population, the whites in these counties being usually Democrats. The Lily Whites were mostly found in the counties where fewer blacks lived. During Reconstruction, efforts by Black and Tan Republicans in favor of racial equality drew violence from Democratic white supremacists, including Ku Klux Klan, who resorted to violence against the early civil rights activists. Families of Southern Republicans, both black and white, were harassed by Democratic whites. The increasing decline of Southern Republicanism, brought about by the rise of Jim Crow, led many white Republicans to view abandoning civil rights advocacy as the only means of maintaining significant party influence in the region. This contributed to the rise of the Lily White movement, which would clash with Black and Tans for decades to come. The disintegration of their influence in the Republican Party came about with the replacement of old right-oriented politics amidst the rise of the new right under Eisenhower Republicanism. A campaign of white nationalist terrorism arose across the South, targeting black Republican legislators and voters. In Georgia, the 1868 state legislature voted to expel its black members, all of whom were Republican. They were eventually reseated, but not before white racist vigilantes in the town of Camilla opened fire on black marchers attending a Republican rally, killing some, nearly a dozen, and wounding dozens more. That same year in South Carolina, white vigilantes killed a number of black legislators. One of them, Benjamin F. Randolph, was shot in broad daylight at a train station. No one was ever tried for the crime, let alone convicted of it. In the Colfax Massacre of 1873, dozens of black Republicans and state militiamen were killed during an attempt to overturn election results in Louisiana. Federal forces kept some of these racial terror in check, but not all of it, and white Republican leaders occasionally bowed to the violence out of political expediency. The federal government gave little attention to the needs of colored people at the time. Still, by the standards of the day, the federal government was relatively integrated. Many blacks had jobs in the U.S. government. After 1912, many people left the Republican Party, and the party underwent an ideological shift to the right. The GOP lost its congressional majorities during the Great Depression under Franklin Roosevelt, forming a New Deal coalition that was dominant from 1932 through 1964. Reconstruction ended during the 1870s at different times in different states. However, when Rutherford B. Hayes became president in 1877, he ended Reconstruction totally. Blacks lost the support of the Union Army. After about 10 to 15 years, blacks began losing their voting rights in southern states. Most southern blacks had lost the right to vote by 1900. The Republican Party depended on black votes, so it almost ceased to exist in the South. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat raised in the South, began segregating the government workforce. Blacks were given lower-level jobs and worse working conditions. The next three presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, all Republicans, did little for blacks. They also continued segregating the U.S. civil service. Both the National Republican and Democratic parties had abandoned black citizens. In 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat, began the New Deal. The New Deal was an economic program designed to lift the country out of the Great Depression that began in 1929. At first, Roosevelt did little to help blacks specifically. He did a great deal to help poor people, which included almost all blacks. In 1936, both blacks and whites voted overwhelmingly for Franklin Roosevelt. In the late 1930s, Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor did more for black people than had been done since Reconstruction. Many blacks began voting Democratic routinely. Southern blacks had flooded into northern cities during the Great Migration. Therefore, the big city political machines, which were Democratic, began to work to get black votes. The influence of Eisenhower Republicanism over the Republican Party resulted in a dissipation of black and tan influence in Southern GOP politics, particularly in 1956. The final victory of the lily-white faction came in 1964, when surviving black and tan factions lost heavily with the nomination of Barry Goldwater for president and practically vanished. Since 1972, Democratic presidential candidates have won over 80% of the black vote. Today, almost all white Southerners vote Republican. The impact of black voters cannot be overstated. From grassroots organizing to national elections, their voices drive the party's commitment to justice and equity. The future of the Democratic Party is inextricably linked to the aspirations and activism of black Americans. Until next time, if you like little-known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.